Welcome to the Moffitt Method Podcast, where longtime strength and conditioning coach Tommy Moffitt explores everything from the art of coaching, improving performance, sports nutrition, and mental training. Now, welcome your host, Coach Tommy Moffitt.
Welcome to the Moffitt Method Podcast, and I am your host, Tommy Moffitt. If you're listening for the first time, please take a moment to subscribe to the podcast and share it with your friends. For more information about the Moffitt Method speed, strength, and conditioning programs, please visit our website, themoffittmethod.fit, or email us at info@themoffittmethod.fit. Our incredible guest today and a very good friend is Kevin Yoxall, Texas Territory Manager for Dynamic Fitness and Strength. A former strength coach, Coach Yoxall has 35 plus years on the floor coaching athletes in high school, college, and at the professional level. Coach Yoxall received his undergraduate degree in special education from East Texas State University in 1983. Upon graduation, he taught special education students in the Houston area for 4 years. Coach Yoxall then obtained his master's degree in physical education from TCU in 1989. While at TCU, he served as a graduate assistant strength and conditioning coach. Coach became the head strength and conditioning coach there at TCU in May of 1989, where he remained through 1993. From there, he moved on to be a head strength and conditioning coach at the University of Minnesota, UCLA, and Auburn University. Coach Yoxall is a master strength and conditioning coach and was a member of the 2002 class and is both CSCCA and CSCS certified. Coach is a former vice president and board member with the CSCCA. Coach and his wife Nancy live in Waco, Texas now, and they have 2 adult children, Colin and Marley. Welcome to the podcast, Coach.
Hey, man, good to see you again.
Yeah.
We talk on the phone all the time, but it's good to see your face.
Yes, it is, man. Great talking to you, and I'm fired up about this episode because.
Well, I'm flattered. I'm flattered to be on it, man. Humble.
Yeah,
it's great.
Thank you. All right, so let's get started with the first question, man. How did this journey begin? Where did it all start?
Well, I saw that question on the script, and I thought, okay, do I need to give them the official beginning or the unofficial beginning? And unofficially, I'm a little long in the tooth. So Back when I was in college, you didn't have strength coaches, especially where I was at. It's an NAI Division I school. I still call it East Texas State. I can't call it Texas A&M Commerce. I just can't bring myself to do that. But anyway, East Texas State, we didn't have strength coaches, but we had a barbell club that was on campus, and I'd taken an interest in lifting when I watched the '72 Olympics. That's how old I am. Yeah. Watching Dave Riggert and Vasily Alexiev. And so I took an interest in lifting. In my high school, Bishop Lynch High School in Dallas, one of the students, his dad owned one of the first Nautilus training centers. Mm-hmm. And he donated a bunch of Nautilus, the best machines I think that are still out there. We had a whole line of Nautilus equipment. We had free weights. So we had a pretty good weight room, and I took to it. And so that interest went into college. And where I was, we didn't have a strength coach, but we had this barbell club on campus. And there was a handful of us, football players, throwers, that were very interested in training. And so when we had a bit of a mandatory off season, but it wasn't anything like it is now. Yeah. And we loved lifting. And so in the off seasons, we would compete in Olympic lifting meets and powerlifting. And that's how me competing in powerlifting and Olympic lifting actually started, was in college. And then we'd bring other athletes into the weight room, just kind of literally drag them in there and start training them. So I was unofficially kind of the pseudo strength coach, me and 3 other guys at East Texas State during my time there. And that that just spawned that interest in it. You and I were talking earlier. I majored in special education, so when I left college, when I graduated, I became a teacher. I taught in the classroom. I taught adaptive PE. Didn't have any inkling that I was going to be a coach or a strength and conditioning coach. That never really crossed my mind, but I was still competing in powerlifting and weightlifting at the time. And this is in the early 80s down in Houston, the Houston area. And a friend of mine, Robbie Robinson, I had met him in college through another guy that was on the track team as another thrower. And Robbie finished up, he was at the University of Texas. After he finished, he worked for Dana LeDuc at Texas. And then he ended up being the head strength coach at TCU. And Robbie and I had kind of kept in contact with each other. And my wife went to TCU, totally unrelated to me ever working there, but Nancy went to TCU. We went to a football game at TCU, and this is how random it was. We went to a football game, and this is before cell phones and texting and all that. Yeah. I called Robbie, and at one point during the week, I said, "Hey, we're going to be down at the game. I'd love to just say hello." So I literally went down to the field, the retaining wall at the field, right after he finished warm-ups, and just said hello. "Hey, what are you doing?" "I got married. I'm doing this. I'm doing that." He goes, and I said, "But I'm hearing about, jobs like yours." I said, "What would it take to become a strength coach?" And he goes, "Dude, my GA's leaving at the end of the summer." This was during the football season. He goes, "At the end of the summer, my GA's leaving. Do you want to be my GA?" He goes, "We'll pay for your master's. We'll pay you a stipend. And, I can teach you the trade, And at the time, I didn't know what GA stood for. And I really didn't understand what stipend meant either, right? Yeah. So I go back up in the stands. My in-laws are up there with Nancy, and Nancy's, "Well, how's Robbie?" I said, "Oh, he's great. He offered me a job." And so Nancy and I talked about it, and we decided to take a leap of faith and take that $150 stipend a month. And then Robbie, so this is, and I tell people this too. Here was a Southwest Conference school, right? Yeah. We had they generously called it 1,500 square foot weight room. That was way generous. We had 4 squat racks, 4 platforms, 4 standalone platforms, 4 standalone benches, 4 standalone inclines, a plethora of different machines, all stuffed in this room. Me, a GA, and Robbie, and that was it for 16 sports. And this is before computers, and Robbie didn't like computers anyway. Yeah. Well, a year and a half into him working for him, this is how the pay was too. A year and a half working for him at TCU, he gets a job offer from Mesquite High School, where he had gone to school, to be their DN coach and to be their strength coach. And it was more money than what he was making at a Southwest Conference school as a strength coach. Yeah. So he left. Yeah. He left. So they made me the interim, and I just followed his programs that he had created, and they made me the interim. And then that was in the spring of '89, he left. And then they interviewed me and interviewed some other people. And I'd still tell people, I still don't understand what the hell they were thinking when they hired me. Yeah. But they hired me in 1989.
That is amazing, yeah.
And I was finishing up my degree, my master's. And I started out at TCU, and that's how it started for me. There wasn't wasn't like a lot of guys and men and women where you're in school and you're majoring in kines and you're doing internships and all that kind of stuff. But and I know we'll talk about this more, but I'm really glad that I got to begin the way that I began. Yeah. Back then, when we all had, people nowadays, they don't understand having 6, 7 double-digit numbers of sports. Yeah. Men and women, and I'm really glad that that's the time that I started.
Yeah, and just a few bars, and and some of those bars wouldn't even rotate.
Right.
And, and you didn't. Very few people had bumpers.
Yep.
We didn't have bumpers. We did have some good York bars, but we did all of our cleans and everything with metal weights.
Right.
And if you dropped them, you might get smacked upside the head.
Right.
You might get smacked upside the head by the strength coach.
Right.
And, that's how Bruno Pauletto. When I got when I got out of college, I met Bruno Pauletto, and there's probably not a lot of people here that even knows who Bruno Pauletto is.
Yeah.
But he was the first strength coach at the University of Tennessee. And I guess Robbie Robinson was probably the first strength coach at TCU.
Robbie was. Yeah. He sure was.
And so Bruno was a
and I met Bruno through Robbie, because Robbie was also a thrower and all that. Yeah.
Bruno was a shot putter at Central Michigan. I think it was Central Michigan, and he was a Italian immigrant.
Right.
Came here to go to college, throw the shot put, and he applied for grad school at the University of Tennessee, and they saw that he was a giant of a man.
Yep.
And they saw him walking around, and they enticed him to come to the weight room, and he became the grad assistant strength coach for the University of Tennessee Volunteers, and later became the head strength coach, and the rest is history. And that was about that. That was about that same time.
Yeah.
That was about that same time. And you're just a few years older than me, but that's I started my career in 1988.
Yeah.
It was 1987 when I met Bruno. I met Bruno.
I started in 87. I taught school for 4 years before I ever even walked in the weight room at TCU.
Yeah. So I met Bruno in 1987, and he was still the grad assistant. He wasn't the full-time strength coach. He didn't become the full-time strength coach until later on. That's awesome. So you've coached at some great schools, man.
Yeah, I've been very fortunate.
And so I know that your career path, was kind of like on a, you had a bullet, when the record, when they used to have the American Top 40, they'd have a bullet beside that song that's going up. So your career took off, man. And I'm sure that there were some memorable stops and games and stuff along the way. Can you talk about some of those other places that you coached at and some of those memorable moments that you remember?
So I was at TCU collectively, GA, and as the head strength coach for about 6 years. And then the head football coach, Jim Wacker at the time, he left to go to the University of Minnesota in 91, I think. And this was before, the conversation we had before we started this interview today. That was back then. You didn't necessarily follow your coach to another school. And so Jim left to go to Minnesota, and he was asked to keep the person that was there. And then Pat Sullivan, who won the Heisman Trophy back in 1971, he became the head coach at TCU. And man, Pat retained me, and things were going good. We weren't very good, but things were going good. And then Jim created a football only position. I think I was probably one of the first football only strength coaches. So in 92, I left and went to the University of Minnesota. And, we were, my 3 years up there, we weren't very good, but we beat Wisconsin twice, which is a huge game there. Yeah. We had as a matter of fact, we beat Wisconsin the year that they were undefeated and played in the Rose Bowl, except for us beating them. And I guess that was 92. That might've been the fall of 93. I think they played in the Rose Bowl, and we were the only defeat that they had that year. And so there weren't a lot of real memorable stuff at Minnesota, but I really enjoyed coaching up there. Except for the 6 months a year you got snow on the ground. But then and this is when I knew that my wife, when Nancy and I got married, she married a special ed teacher. She didn't marry a strength coach.
Yeah.
Okay. And so she had, she went through a process of being a coach, especially a strength coach's wife. It's one thing to be a coach's wife. It's another thing to be a strength coach's wife, as you well know. And and this is, again, people got to understand, this is before cell phones, right? This is before footballscoop.com.
This is before pagers and even answering machines.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Well, so one day I get a call. I had met John Arcee, had been at UCLA.
Yeah. Great coach.
He ended up at Purdue. And so we met through competing against each other in the Big Ten. And so John and I became real friendly. And one day one time we were driving back from Texas to Minnesota, and we weren't, as I said, we weren't very good. We just finished a 3-8 year, and I think we were 3-8 all 3 years. And so, there's rumors, and we kind of know we're on the hot seat. And this is the first time she and I are kind of facing this. And I said, well, there's different rumors out there. Let's just see what happens. And we're going into winter conditioning, right? And we were driving through Iowa in a snowstorm. And I said, Nancy, I don't know where our next stop will be, but I promise I won't take you to a place like California. I said that. Okay. Well, fast forward into winter conditioning, I get a phone call on my landline in my office, and it's John Arcee. And John said, hey, the job at UCLA is about to come open. They've asked me to come back. He said, I don't want to go back. We really like it here at Purdue. We like the Midwest. He said, but they've asked me to put a list together. Do you want to be on that list? I said, well, yeah, sure. And I got home that night, and I mentioned to my wife, Nancy, I said, oh, by the way, the UCLA job's open, and I've been asked to apply for it. Are you okay with that? And she goes, well, yeah, it's UCLA. You got to apply for that. So I knew her transition had gotten better during that time. So anyway, I went out there and interviewed, and somehow got an interview. I still don't understand that, but didn't know anybody. And I got hired. So now I was back in the saddle as far as being the overall strength coach. We had one weight room. We had all 21 sports in there. UCLA was my first time to have a full-time staff. I'd always just had GAs. And Mike Lynn, to this day, is still one of my best friends. Mike was there, and he had played there, and I knew really, really quickly I was going to retain him. And Mike just retired from UCLA, as a matter of fact. Yeah. And matter of fact, they moved to Tennessee. He's living in Tennessee now. Yeah. But anyway, yeah. So we got out there to UCLA, and I tell you, that was my first exposure. The winter I got out there was the winter of '96. You had the Atlanta Olympics in the summer. In the Atlanta Olympics that summer, this is my first time to be exposed to this kind of athleticism. In the Atlanta Olympics, I don't know that I'll get this stat correct, but in Atlanta that summer, there were 40 either former or current UCLA athletes representing either America or their country in the Olympics. 40 of them.
John Godina was there. John Godina was throwing the shot.
Yeah, oh yeah, and I know John real well. Yeah. So I got to see those athletes, many of those athletes, in and out of that room every day, whether I was training them or not. Yeah. And wow. The thing that I tell people is going to UCLA made me a better strength coach because I got to see those kind of athletes train. And guess what, Tommy? They trained under the same philosophy that you and I have always believed in. Yeah. They didn't do anything special. They pulled, they squatted, and it going there reaffirmed to me, hey, you know what? Your programming is the way it should be. There wasn't anything special about it. Or anything like that. But here was, and we had all these open athletes out there too. So Jackie Joyner-Kersee, she worked out in my weight room daily, to get to watch her train, right? Yeah. And then the thrower is kind of interesting. Art Venegas, the throws coach out there, they had their own weight room up in Drake Stadium, the stadium, but John Gordina would come down after he finished his eligibility. He trained in our weight room quite a bit too. And just to be able to have the opportunity to watch people like that train, we were successful in every sport while I was there, but football was really successful. First year we weren't very good, and then we lost to you know what? My first game was at Tennessee.
Yeah,
That's Coach Stuckey and I got to visit before the game, and then the next year Tennessee came to LA.
that was Peyton's first game to play.
Yep. Mm-hmm. I tell people that, and they're like, "Damn, you are kind of old, aren't you?"
Yeah. Jerry Colquitt, I think that was his name. Jerry Colquitt, the starter, got hurt, and Peyton went in.
Yeah. Well, so that year we lost to Washington State our first game at Washington State. Why we played a Pac-10 game, first game of the year, I don't know. But then Tennessee came, we lost to them, and then from there we won 20 straight games. Yeah. And we were a pretty good team. We went to, and that's when you and I got together. My last game at UCLA was the infamous hurricane game down in Miami. And then I left to go to after that. I left to go to after the Rose Bowl. We played Wisconsin. Got beat by. I tell people Ron Dane's still gaining yardage from that game. He was that big. He was up and down the field that day. So we lost those two games to Miami, to y'all, and to Wisconsin. And then some guys that I'd worked with at TCU in Minnesota, they had joined Tubbs, Coach Tuberville, at Ole Miss, and they were going to Auburn. Mm-hmm. I was trying to get Mike Lynn the Auburn job. Oh, wow. And so I was calling Noel Mazzoni, the offensive coordinator. I was calling Noel. Again, no cell phones, right?
Yeah.
We're leaving each other messages, and I'm trying to get a hold of him to tell him about Mike. Right? Noel and I finally get a hold of each other, and this is during practice for the Rose Bowl. We get a hold of each other, and I said, "Hey, man, I got a guy for you. This guy's awesome." He goes, "You're damn right you got a guy. When are you coming?" And I said, "No, my assistant, Mike Lynn." He goes, No. I've already told Tubbs about you. We want you here at Auburn." I said, "Mike, it's going really good here at UCLA."
Yeah.
So I went out to Auburn as a favor to him, just to see it. Yeah. And Tommy, you've been there, man. I got to Auburn, and again, no cell phones, right? Yeah. I talked to Tubbs. I saw the facility. I was the overall strength coach, but I just had day-to-day, just had football. Yeah. I called my wife Collect from an office phone. And I said, "Hey, pack it up. Pack it up." And never would have thought, and probably you're the same way, I never would have thought that I'd been at Auburn for 14 years. Yeah. And that's, that happened, and I'll always be grateful for it, even when my time came to leave. I took the high road, because to be there for 14 years and the years we had, except for two seasons, some pretty damn good years. So great college town. That strip, the strip that goes through the middle of town. That's a cool place, man. It was because we traveled. I got to travel with the football program, but then being able to go with Clay and watch him play baseball, great venue.
You kind of get a different perspective and of what the experience is like, because you see it in the daytime and you're not worried about getting your teeth kicked in. And
that didn't happen very often,
Yeah, but it was a lot of fun, man. I really liked Auburn a lot.
Yeah,
great.
Well, and both my kids. So Colin was, 6 years old, and Marley was just barely 3. And they both graduated from Auburn High, and we couldn't ask for better. And when we got let go, Marley was a senior in high school. Yeah, I mean, it just couldn't have worked out better.
Yeah, amen to that, man.
Yeah.
And so there's a couple of things I want to. There was one thing that you said earlier. You were talking about the Southwest Conference.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of our listeners are young enough that they don't remember and I'm going to put it in air quotations, the old Southwest Conference.
Right.
But that conference was then really what the SEC is today.
Right. Mm-hmm.
and TCU, you had TCU, and I guess Grant Taft was the coach at
Baylor.
Baylor
Yes, sir.
then.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, you talk about some great programs. Texas A&M, Arkansas was really good. That conference then, Rice was competitive. That didn't sound right, but
I know what you're saying. Well, don't forget, I coached at Rice too, so that was my last college job.
Yeah, sorry about that, but I mean, that conference was a juggernaut from top to bottom.
There's no doubt, and we called it the bus league because the furthest games were Arkansas, and people don't understand how big Texas is. Yeah. Arkansas and Lubbock were the furthest games away for us, anyway.
Yeah.
So we used to bus down. We bused to Houston when we played Rice or Houston. Yeah, we bus. We flew to Arkansas. We flew to Lubbock. Yeah.
Yeah. See, that's when I was at Tennessee, we bused to Lexington and to Vanderbilt. But here at LSU, we played Tulane once in the Superdome. That's the only place that we ever bused to. But
the conference, Southwest Conference, was
it was a juggernaut.
Well, what you saying that it's kind of like the SEC is now, you're about right. I mean, it really was. I mean, I'd say the Big Ten was in there too, but
you're right.
Man, I tell you, I'm very honored to have coached in that league. I really am.
Yeah, a lot of great coaches, man. At Texas A&M, they all had, Hall of Fame coaches. That was awesome. And then the other thing, what's amazing is, and your early coaching years even predated call waiting. So when you called someone, if they were on the other line, you got a busy signal.
Right. Yep.
And there was no such thing as call waiting. There were no voicemails or anything, but you talked about the friendships that you developed.
Yep.
And that's how our friendship, I remember meeting you before the game and after the game when we played you at Miami, and that place was total chaos. That was it was total chaos. And I remember you telling me that our fans stole some of y'all's helmets and stuff off the sideline. Like it was total chaos. But we still took the time to be generous to one another and shake each other's hands.
Sure.
And we did that. And it was really neat. During our time at LSU and Auburn, we would always meet out on the field, and you would always say, can you believe that we get paid to do this? That was what you would always say. And,
we fooled them again.
Yeah. Hey, another year, man. But there was this bond, friendship that went beyond the playing field, and regardless, and we had some knockdown and drag.
Oh my goodness,
battles. Woo. And 1, 2, and 3 point games. Every time we played, it was a close game. Yeah.
What was that one? What was that one at Auburn? Was it 9-7 or?
Yeah, and we
got to kick the extra point. We got to kick the extra point about 5 different times.
To win the game, So that is one, that, and after that, so when you lose a game like that, and you just get your heart ripped out, and then you and I would meet at the 50-yard line. We'd shake each other's hands. We'd smile. We'd find something to laugh about and say, "Hey, man, we'll see you next year." And that's what that goes a long way in this industry, man.
Oh yeah, it does.
You can be competitors. Like our two schools hated one another, but we found a way within that competition, that competitive arena, to be cordial and to develop a lifelong relationship. And
that's one thing Robbie taught me. He always, when I was his GA, if I got to travel to a game, which was very rare, he made sure that I met the opposing strength coach and any of his staff that were around. One time we went I was able to travel to Brigham Young. We played BYU, and we went over to see Chuck Stiggins at his weight room, and just to meet those people and interact with them. I always just felt like that was real important. And I've had coaches before where I've cold called them again before cell phones and all that. And they've been surprised. They've been taken aback that I would call them, but I always made sure I called and said, "Hey, coach, I don't know what your routine is once you're done with the kids, but I'd love to meet you. Or if, after you and I have gotten to know each other for all these years, hey, make sure we get together." I think that's important for the profession. And I've had it. I won't name any names, but I've had coaches that have refused to talk to me before games. I'm like, okay, I'm not going to be tossing and turning in bed tonight because of this. But
the fight wasn't between you and I.
Well, I always tell people this. By the time we got done with our stuff, except for being competitive and wanting to win the game and charging our kids up before the game and all that kind of stuff, and our hay was in the barn.
Yeah.
There wasn't anything else we could do except hand out things to drink at halftime and pat them on the ass and do all that.
I didn't. I never called a play. Play.
Yeah. Now I loved it. I loved being on the sidelines and being competitive and yelling shit over at you and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, I loved it. I'd be lying to say that I didn't miss it, but there's plenty that I don't miss. But like I said earlier, but yeah,
we have wars.
Yeah, and I just always believe that the relationship, and the other thing that always bugged me too, and you're prime, you are for me, you're the example, the epitome of this, right? When you call somebody and say, "Hey, coach, what are you guys doing for this? What are you doing for that?" And there's those guys that share like you, and then there's those guys, I don't, coach, I don't talk about that. And one of the greatest, I have about 10 professional trips that I made over those years that I count as my best visits ever. I went to go see Al. I went and saw Al Miller and Johnny Parker in the same visit one time.
Wow.
I went to see Al up at, I was at Minnesota. I went to see Al in New York. And then I flew to Rhode Island and drove to Foxborough and saw Johnny. Those were, that was in the same visit. That was all in the same week. Well, the time I came to see you, I guess that was 03, 04.
Yeah.
You and I sat down. You spent a whole afternoon at your desk. I remember Muschamp was coaching there because he popped his head in the door and said something smart ass or something. Yeah, exactly. He went. Then he got up on your stepper and pounded the shit out of your stepper, making noise. But anyway, everything you shared with me that day was stuff that I still have in my programming now.
Yeah.
And a lot of guys wouldn't do that.
Yeah. No, there were no secrets, man.
No.
This thing that we do isn't an exact science.
No.
And,
can't be.
And it's all available. And it was shared to me by someone, Al Miller and Johnny Parker being two.
Yep.
And you might as well share it with someone else because that's just, and again, that's why, and this is the main reason why, because I've had a lot of really good strength coaches on here, and we've had some great conversations.
Well, until today, you had some good ones, but
you
regressed today. You took a step back today.
But this is the most important conversation that I think I've had on the podcast because, in fact, Coach Parker, was adamant about this same thing, and I've often talked on the podcast where, this guy was the head strength coach of the world champion, New England Patriots. And he would answer. Now, again, there were no emails or text messaging or anything. And there was no voice, no answering machine. And I would type questions on a piece of loose leaf paper, put them in an envelope and mail it to him. And he would reply handwritten
Mm-hmm.
notes to me. And I still have those here today. And that
Yeah.
man was the head football coach of the world champion
Yeah.
um, uh, professional football team.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sorry, the New York Football
New York.
Giants then.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
The New York Football Giants. And he answered every question that I ever sent to him.
Yeah. Oh, I can believe it.
And that's, that's what the profession was and should always be a
Oh,
part
sure.
of. Because,
Yeah.
again, we don't call plays, man.
Right.
Uh, you know, um, so and that was the reason for this podcast, the whole thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right, so let's change gears here because I
Okay.
want to talk about, and your teams were notorious for this: team culture, motivation, and discipline are as important today in college athletics and sports than ever. Okay, it's
Right.
more important than ever. What are some of the things that you did, to foster team culture, work ethic, discipline, and motivation within the teams that you coached?
Well, it's interesting that you asked that. I saw an interview question, an answer to a presser the other night with Coach Sarkisian at Texas, and he talked. It was a really great answer, and he talked about culture and all this kind of stuff. And I have 4 siblings, and they've always been the biggest fans of wherever I've coached.
Yeah.
And so they sent it to me. And what do you think? They all went to Texas, by the way, so they wanted to know what I thought of his answer. And I said, that's spot on. And they started to ask me the same thing you just asked me. What did I do about culture? Because they kind of knew what I was known for when I was coaching. And I said, I never really thought about it as building culture. I just thought of things. Okay, what's the right thing to do here?
Right.
And that was the whole thing. And I hung my hat. I've told people this. I never have thought of myself as a great strength conditioning coach, but I worked really hard, and I worked hard at putting together great programs. And I think that was the thing that I did. I just stayed as consistent as I could with discipline. Was I 100% correct all the time and all that? No, I wasn't. But I was pretty damn consistent about how we were going to do things. And I think my background in powerlifting and Olympic lifting, I really stood firm on the technique that we used in the weight room. I didn't, even though competitively I came from a weight competition background, I didn't get hung up on. I'll tell you a funny story here in a second. I didn't get hung up on. I was just like you. I wanted my guys to max out and do really well, but if they weren't doing the lift correctly, I wasn't going to get all jacked up about numbers and things like that. And then the other thing was I hung my hat on guys being in condition. And I know part of the script for today was what would you do different and all that, and I'll get to that when you ask that question. But I was a firm believer, especially playing in the Southwest Conference. I was a firm believer, and we had to be in condition. And so if we were lifting 9 times out of 10, 9.5 times out of 10, we were doing some kind of conditioning that day. It might be a low level or it may be high, and we may still be squatting heavy on that day, but I just felt really strongly about conditioning. And then a lot of times I still joke with former players. I know you keep contact with a lot of your guys. We joke about guys coming on campus the very first time, that first summer workout, and guys falling out of the warm up, which all my guys that have been there for a year or so, the warm up is a warm up, Yeah. But a guy's brand new. I mean, you remember that big, and if he sees this, he'll laugh. He'll say it's true. Remember DeMarco McNeil, who played for us? Yeah. DeMarco came from Pritchard, Alabama, and he showed up, and he lasted about 5 minutes into that warm up, and he was done for that day. That was all he could do, and that was a freshman warm up. That was a watered down warm up.
Yeah.
But the thing that I tried to be, whether it was culture or whatever, was I tried to be as consistent with my players as I possibly could be. and I just felt like you had to do what was right, and I know that sounds really simple,
Yeah.
but, and it wasn't the same. It didn't look the same every day, but
Right.
I was, and if a guy screwed up, whether it was a good kid or a bad kid, he knew there was a price to pay, so I just try to be consistent, man.
Yeah, that's huge. I
Yeah.
had a football player one time. Had a football player. He's now he's a assistant VP or something along those lines for a professional football team.
Uh-huh.
Came to me one day. He was upset, about a position coach, and he said, "Coach, I just, why can't people just be the same every day? It's a lot easier, if coaches are the same every day, and for the athlete,
Right.
just be the same every day. Treat me the same today as you did yesterday, and then
Mm-hmm.
as you will tomorrow." And it's consistency, and you're right. That's
Right.
huge.
Yeah.
All right,
That's
so yeah, so when you were hiring assistants,
mm-hmm.
and you've had some great ones, man.
Yep.
When you were hiring assistants, what were some of the things that you felt they needed in order to be a member of your staff? What are some
Well,
attributes?
besides all the objective ones, the certification, and I didn't necessarily have to have somebody that had an undergrad degree in the
Right.
field.
Yeah.
My degree was in special ed. My minor was in physical ed.
Yeah.
And Mike Lynn, who I had at UCLA, is one of the best strength coaches I've ever met. Mike majored in history at UCLA.
Oh, wow.
But one of the keys that the person didn't have to be necessarily an athlete in college as an undergrad, but I wanted them to have had some kind of background and involvement, not only in high school, but in college too, whether they interned or something like that. I wanted to make sure that I just wasn't hiring somebody that had been no offense, but had been in an exercise phys lab
Yeah.
their whole time. I wanted some kind of athletic,
Yeah. Some
pretty
kind of
solid
practical
background.
experience. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And then the other thing was, and especially during the time that I was in the meat of my career, the hours, the amount of time that I knew we were going to spend. And I was, and I wasn't very good about delegation. I wasn't very good about time frames and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to make sure through the interview process, through the checking references, that I was going to hire somebody that wasn't going to mind being up there and grinding,
Yeah.
and,
Yeah.
and again, I wasn't good at delegation, but I wanted to make sure that whoever I hired, they were good at those long hours, but I wasn't going to have to worry about them after they were gone from the program.
Right.
I didn't necessarily have a preference if somebody was married or not, but if they were, a lot of times, if it was getting to a real serious point and it was a full-time position, I would see if we could bring their wife on the interview, because I wanted my wife to meet their wife, and see, and I'd grill Nancy after that. I'd go, okay, is she all in and all
She
that kind of
tough
stuff?
enough. Yeah.
Yeah, right.
Is
Yeah,
she tough enough?
yeah. Mm-hmm. So I didn't have a set criteria. If it was a full-time interview, I had them interview with the trainer, the trainer that was like at Auburn, the football trainer, head coaches and all that kind of stuff. But I wanted somebody that was going to get in there and grind, and I wanted them to be aligned with me philosophically. Not to say that we didn't have disagreements or anything like that, but my programming was pretty basic. I didn't have a lot of Sandy Abney, who was at Texas for a long time. Sandy had a good analogy. She said, "Yeah, I just don't like programs that have a lot of bubbles and balls in them."
Yeah.
And I didn't, I wanted to make sure they weren't a bubbles and ball person, because I just never have had time for that. So,
right. Good deal.
Yeah.
All right. So speaking of bubbles and balls, from the beginning of your career,
Oh Lord,
until now,
yep,
our business has changed.
Yep.
and you've witnessed, a big swing in the approach to training and development, for football. Can
Mm-hmm.
you touch on that a little bit, and where do you see it going, and how do you feel about all that? And you're in the equipment industry too, so
Right.
you're heavily involved with the equipment that is used to do this. So how
Yeah.
do you see the changes that have taken place?
Well, I think, at times I feel like we're getting away from just really good, solid strength work. And again, like I said, I have a weightlifting background and a powerlifting background. I'm not talking about one rep maxes and things like that, but I'm just talking about good basic strength work. And so while my programming changed quite a bit, especially conditioning wise,
Yeah.
I never got too far away from those basic lifts being some part of the meat of my programming, right?
Yeah.
But I see that I think they've been getting away from a lot of real true strength work. Now I've been up to Michigan and I've seen Ben work and a lot of guys and Scott over in Georgia. I know there's still a lot of strength work going on, but I just think sometimes there's so many things out there now that we tend to forget. Oh shit, this has been working for a long time.
Yeah.
You know, doesn't have to be a back squat, but it needs to be that motion. And it's kind of funny how things they do go full circle. When CrossFit became the craze, everybody's like, "Oh, this is fantastic!" And I just looked at it, I was like, "Okay, well, that's the same thing I started doing in 1978." But okay, um, you know, so I don't know that it's. I think what's changed more, and I text with him all the time. I think Rusty Witt's doing a great job with this.
Yeah.
The technical stuff, um, grading and keeping up with power and output and things like that. I think that's been fantastic because, actually, I think it's a little bit of double-edged sword. It's been fantastic because you can now look and you can see how fast somebody's moving. But the other thing, and I spoke at Baylor a while back at a clinic, I worry that too many young coaches they don't have that eye
Right.
to look at somebody and go, that didn't look real fast.
Yeah.
But now you can see it, so that's a good thing. But so I think the technology has gotten really, really good, but I hope it never gets to the point where the coach themselves, he or she, loses that subjective ability to judge, running technique and things like that,
Right.
because that's so important. But I think the technological developments have been fantastic. I was to a point at Auburn right when I was leaving, things like GPS and all that was really taking hold. And of course, I was at a place where we could afford it.
Yeah.
Well, then I left,
Yeah.
and then I went to a place like Rice, and we couldn't afford that. So I haven't gotten the full exposure
Right.
to GPS. I mean, I know enough about it to be dangerous, but I never had it as a coach, so I don't know a whole lot about it. But I think it's a good thing as long as somewhere, and I'm talking more about team sports, so not so much track and things like that, but in team sports, tracking movements, tracking contacts to the ground, tracking how many jumps and all that's all fine and good. But I've seen where some programs, the coach will walk in and he'll hand that head football coach different metrics on guys being fatigued and stuff. And again, this gets away from having that subjective decision making to where the coach sees certain numbers and they go, "Oh yeah, we need to back off of them." And I get backing off of kids when they needed it, but for the longest time we used our eyes and it worked out pretty good. So I think that whole thing is a bit of a double-edged sword to me. Where do you go? Yeah, I know they're tired, but guess what? We're playing LSU in September, It's going to be hot as shit down there. It's going to be a night game. We got to push. We got to push because of that. So I worry about those kind of things. And I didn't have enough exposure to have a great working knowledge of how that is.
Okay, so on that notion right there, all right, were there any challenges that you saw that are unique to college football, like playing in Baton Rouge on a Saturday night versus some of the other sports that probably influenced your training philosophy?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think that putting guys under certain stressors when they're tired is important, because I think that transfers into being in Tuscaloosa, and again, it's you can't put a pen in a piece of paper to it. Yeah. And there's a lot of people out there that will argue with me on that, but it's just different, and they're tired. And how are they going to get it? How are they going to get over the hump and get it done? And the only thing that I knew to do as a strength coach was, as I'm walking to the opposite end of the field, and we've now run whatever we've run, and I know their tanks are empty. They're empty. I call it Jedi mind tricks. You gotta pull it out of there. You gotta get the Jedi mind trick going. And the next thing you know, the kids finish that workout. They're back the next week. They're okay. And then somewhere along the line, that extra that you did that day is going to come through in some ball game. It may be, it may be a game that you're supposed to win and something happens and you don't, but you're able to reach down. So again, not an exact science. Yeah. But I felt like pushing those guys really hard. And when I coached women, pushing them really hard too, because somewhere along the line, that weight room, that 110, that 90, whatever you're running, is going to make a difference.
Yeah. We used to call it toughness. Mm-hmm. Now it's called resilience. I think toughness is one of those words that, people don't like that word.
Right.
And I guess, it's not one of those things that you can measure objectively, with a device. So it's called resilience by a lot of people now.
Right.
But we just had our 2003 national championship reunion. And man, we played y'all when we played y'all here in 2003, and y'all had a hell of a ball club.
Right. Yeah, we were just on the cusp of that 2014. Yeah.
Yeah. Y'all were unbelievable, man. And so, we were fortunate enough to be able to beat y'all and go on and win a championship. And then, let me go back and say that team y'all had was ridiculous. But anyway, it was ridiculous.
I had nothing to do with it, man.
Holy mackerel.
But I don't know that I told people this many times. I don't know that I'd ever have two running backs like Cardell Williams and Roddy Brown in the same backfield.
Yeah.
And you talk about, this is getting off a little bit, but you talk about competitive in the weight room.
Yeah.
Oh, Lord have mercy, man.
Well, see, all right. So that's what Coach Stuckey used to say about Barry Sanders.
Yeah.
Barry Sanders was the same way in the weight room as those two guys, and the same way as Joseph Adai was, or Clyde Edwards-Helaire, or whoever it was for us too. At Oklahoma State, they had Barry Sanders and the guy that played for the Buffalo Bills.
Oh man. We're having a senior moment.
Yeah.
I know what you're talking about.
Anyway, so golly. All right, this is what happens from all those guys that were dropped on the floor. But and they're the same way, that the hard work in the weight room builds that up. But back to what we were talking about, when we had that 2003 reunion, you would not believe the number of players that came up to me and said, because it was just a couple of weeks ago, we were playing Florida here. And they said, Coach, I never will forget. We were out, we were in the stadium one day, and we were running this. We were
Yeah.
doing something,
Right.
and you did this, and that is the reason why we won the national championship.
Oh my God, I've heard that so many times. Yeah.
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 We were doing this, and that is the reason why we beat so-and-so, or that is the reason why this football team won a national championship. And it wasn't X's and O's and stuff like that. It was about them being able to do hard things,
Mm-hmm.
and it builds confidence. And again, it's not one of those things that you can measure, whether you call it toughness, you call it resilience, you call it whatever you want. Some people are born with it, and it is a part of their DNA. And there are other people who learn to overcome adversity.
Right. And we've had plenty of those guys, man.
Yeah. By doing hard things. And that's one of those things that's frowned upon now.
Yeah.
But I think, so I agree completely with you. I agree.
It's humbling, to be in those situations you just talked about, whether you're at a reunion or somebody calls you from out of the blue. Facebook. I mean, Facebook's been a revelation to me. My wife says, "Do you know how many people you have on Facebook?" I said, "No, I don't, but I probably should." But just to hear from all, and men and women both, I mean, Tommy, my TCU kids, right?
Yeah.
They're all past their mid-50s.
Yeah.
Right now.
They have kids. Yeah.
Yeah. And I still hear from them, and you talk about take you to your knees now.
Yeah.
Golly, that's humbling, man.
Yeah.
Good
so
stuff.
when I was at LSU, I actually coached some of the children from people that I had coached. And
I have too.
And that right there is humbling. To when you're at a recruiting function, or you're doing something, and there's a parent there that you coached. You talk about a humbling experience.
Well, my job here at the high school here, Midway, my last high school job, I found out about that job from a former TCU player, and he was coaching there, and he had 5 sons. So I ended up coaching 2 or 3 of his sons at Midway High School. But he and I had this relationship, and he called me about that job.
Yeah.
Yeah. He so those things, it's awesome.
Yeah. Well, you and I are a lot alike. One, we're old. 2, we can't remember shit, and so we're a lot alike. But
well, I've always known that.
Yeah, but when I'm driving my car, or if I'm cutting the grass, or if I'm working out or riding my bike, there are these things that come to mind.
Yeah.
Where I look back and I say, man, if I would have just done this, or I wish I would have done that, or there are things that I say, man, I'm glad I did that.
Right.
Tell me about some of those things. Did any of those things come to mind after all this time?
Well, I think the thing that comes to my mind is, and again, we started about the same time, the amount of, and we're talking about just conditioning, overall conditioning, the amount of yardage that I would put athletes through was, again, when I started doing this, I learned from somebody else. And back then, the amount of yardage that I put guys through well into my time at TCU, I think that was a bit overdone. Now, if any of my former players see this, they're going to be like, well, shit, I wish you'd thought about that. But now, that being said, I did make some changes along the way, conditioning, but I always, and I know you and I agree on this too, I always felt very strongly that you still had to have a good base of conditioning. Kind of like I looked at it as the hypertrophy phase in the weight room. You had to have that, right? You had to have that hypertrophy phase in conditioning too.
Yeah, you had to build the base. Yeah.
Yes, and I got this from Rod Cole. I got away from doing the traditional 16-110 test. And I know you and I have had this conversation. Rod ended up doing skill guys 110s, 16. He did his middle, he did his linebacker, tight end type guys, bigger running backs. They ran hundreds. Defensive end type guys, they ran 80s. And then offensive linemen, they ran either 80s or they ran 70s. And he always had a staggered start. So I adopted that. I did that for quite some time. But I've always felt like, though, even as we got deep into the summer, okay, I'd still have 1 or 2 days programmed in the summer where, you know what? Yeah, guys, we're running now with weighted vests. We're doing metabolics. We're doing shorter sprints. You guys are throwing all the time. But guess what? Today, we're gonna do a version of the test. We're gonna break it up into sets. But we're gonna break off, 16 110, 1600s, or I felt like, and again in the weight room I felt that way too, that I didn't get way into in core lifts. I didn't get way into doubles and triples for a long, long time. I mean, we did it, but we mainly stayed with like sets of 5 and 6 in those compound movements because I felt like the strength retention was going to be better if we did that. Likewise, I felt like the conditioning retention, because the conditioning is going to go down during the season anyway.
Yeah.
But I felt like you still had to have some of that. But I didn't. But there were times you're talking about driving and stuff. Yeah, there were times I was like, I don't know if we're running 2,400 yards in a workout was very smart.
Yeah, I'd like to have that back. Yeah.
Now, I will say this. I did it at UCLA. I probably conditioned my players more at UCLA than anywhere else because if anybody's ever lived out there, that weather is so incredible. But I knew we were going to play places in Texas. We were going to Tennessee. I knew we were playing in places where we had to be in shape. So I ran those kids a lot more. And then, thinking about, hey, I'm glad I did that. I got way into pushing and pulling sleds during my time at Auburn, and that was a staple of what we did, man. And we just didn't push unweighted sleds. We had those big old man scale wood sleds, and we had 100-pound plates on those puppies, and we were pushing them. And I felt like the sleds, and then I had a grass hill when I first got there. And then when they built the new weight room, it was going to be put into that hill, but I had them retain. It was about 15 yards wide, and it was 23 yards long, and it was steep. Yeah. I had a lot of so-called speed guys tell me it was too steep. I said, look, it works the hell out of them, and that's all I care about. But it was turfed, and we did a lot of hill sprints, and I'm not talking about just doing a set of sprints and taking a long rest. I drilled them on that hill, man. And we pushed boards up that hill. Yeah. We did a lot of resistive type training in our conditioning. And I felt like that was good.
Good. Great stuff, man. Great stuff. And the name, I couldn't remember the running back's name, so I looked it up. It's Thurman Thomas.
Thurman Thomas. There you go.
Yeah. So Coach Stuckey used to always compare and contrast Thurman Thomas to Barry Sanders, and they're both, Buffalo Bill Hall of Famers. And
you talk about somebody I learned a lot from. Yeah. And I learned a lot from John Stuckey. Yeah. Goodness gracious, man.
Yeah. Yeah, he was a great mentor. He was old school, and we would, on our off days, we would have 6 a.m. staff meetings, and we would sit there and go over the personnel, and we'd go over every player every Wednesday morning at 6 a.m.
Yep.
And he expected every person on our staff, and for that time, that was my first year there was 1994. I got the job there in August of 94, and we probably had 120 guys on the roster because, we had the 105 that you were allowed, plus we had probably 15 or 20. So we probably had 120, or 25 guys on the roster, and he expected us to know everything about every player.
Mm-hmm.
And he was something, man. He taught me so much about this
Oh,
profession, and the thing that he taught me more than anything, and you hear the cliche about the Vince Lombardi said that winning isn't a sometimes thing; it's an all the time thing. Well, Coach Stuckey exhibited that behavior in everything that he did. There
mm-hmm.
wasn't a single day or moment uh, that he wasn't thinking about winning, and uh, back then I wasn't making any money. I was a high school coach before that. I
Yeah.
was a high school coach. I owned a lawn care business. I painted apartment buildings. I did landscaping. I washed windows. I had a company where I'd wash windows of, the businesses in the area. And so when I got to Tennessee, I carried that over, and I was a handyman. I
Mm-hmm.
was pretty good with my hands, and so I started this business where I did garage door openers. Because now when you buy a new house, they all come with garage door openers, but
Right.
I had installed a garage door opener in my house, and it was easy. And I was like, man, I can make money doing this. So I installed garage door openers as an assistant strength coach in my part time.
See,
So
there's some
coach,
things I don't know. There's some things I don't
yeah,
realize.
yeah. So I've always been good. I had my own. I had a chain link when I was in high school. I had my own chain link fence business. I
Wow.
installed chain link fences for a living, and I had a little trailer I pulled behind my car that I had all the stuff that I needed, and so anyway, so that carried over. So Coach Stuckey said, "Hey, I hear you install garage door openers." I said, "Yes, sir." He goes, "You mind?" They had just bought a new house, and it didn't come with garage door
Mm-hmm.
openers. And so he paid me to come over there on the weekend and install garage door openers. And the entire time I was installing, it was a staff meeting. What it was is he found a way to pay me to come to his house so we could have another staff meeting. And he and I sat there all day in the garage. It would have taken me probably 3 hours had I done it by myself. But I
Right.
ended up staying there almost all day long. And all we did was talk training all
Yep.
day long.
Yep.
And that's the way Coach Stuckey was. It was winning was an all the time thing with Coach John Stuckey.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yep.
and I had been successful early in my career, but I learned so much from that man.
Oh
Uh,
man.
it was just such a blessing. And
Yeah.
all right, so you worked with some great college football coaches, and
Right.
I had the pleasure of working with a couple of those guys myself.
Mm-hmm.
But can you talk a little bit about some of those guys, those college football coaches that you worked with that stood out in front of some of those other guys? Like what
Yeah.
made those guys special?
Well, and it would be, if you're talking about head coaches, it'd be everyone that I worked
Yeah,
for. I mean, they were all a little bit different, but starting with Jim Wacker, a lot of people don't, especially now, back when I started and through, up to about 10 or 15 years ago, people knew who Jim Wacker was, but
yeah,
a lot of people don't now. Unfortunately, he's no longer with us. But, Jim for one thing, I'll always be grateful for him because he took a chance on me becoming his becoming the TCU strength coach, but he was the head football coach. But he took a chance on me without seeing, I didn't have any much experience. I was older. I was at the time they hired me, I was 29, but he took a chance on me, and I'll forever be grateful. And uh, Jim was the eternal optimist, almost to a fault. And and some days it would drive you nuts, but he taught me, he just taught me to always try to see the good in everybody. And that was the main thing that I took away from working with Jim, and I was with him at the University of Minnesota as well, and will forever be grateful for him just trusting in me and doing the things that he did. And then I worked for Bob Toledo at UCLA, and
yeah,
Bob was just a great offensive mind. We had Bob Toledo and Al Borges on the same staff.
Yeah.
And those two together offensively, it was
Yeah.
just incredible to watch those guys. And
y'all were elite. Y'all were elite. That team was elite.
Yeah, we had Cade McNown as our quarterback, and we went down to Texas and walked out of there 66-3 one afternoon.
Yeah, big.
But Bob just was offensively just off the charts as far as head coach. Everybody I worked for let me do my job. I didn't have anybody that was, if they had a question, they were going to ask it, and if they wanted something different, that was their prerogative for them to ask that I change it. But that very, very rarely happened. And then working with Tommy at Auburn, Tommy was the epitome of delegating, letting his coaches coach, and that included the weight room. And so I was always be grateful. And he was one of the ones that, going to work for him set me on a pretty good path, in terms of notoriety and things like that, and just simply being able to coach at a place like Auburn. But he really delegated well, and he let me do my job and run things the way I saw fit. He did. We did get to the point where I was the Turk for everything. I was a disciplinarian for everything, and that at times that was pretty tough. But he even then he let me make my own judgment calls on different things that I did. And the thing about working for Tommy is great defensive mind, and he wasn't afraid to take a chance. Yeah. And I think y'all were privy to some of those onside kicks.
Oh yeah, like yeah. He didn't care. But and he was the defense coordinator at Miami before he got that job. And if you remember those teams that they had in Miami, I mean, they won that on the back of his defense. Yeah, it's a great defensive mind.
Yeah, the thing I'll say about Tommy is that he's. And not that Jim and Bob didn't see the value in the strength coach, but Tommy was the first one that I worked for where there wasn't, as far as, and I wasn't all about making money, but he saw fit that I was part of that staff, and financially, benefit wise, bonuses, it was all equal, and that he was the first guy that I had that did that.
Yeah.
And worked for him for a long time, worked for him for 10 years. And then Gene Chizik came back, and will forever be grateful for Gene retaining me. We've all, as I said earlier, we've all sat in that chair when there's a coaching change. You're like, okay, well, and Gene had a guy at Iowa State, and I figured that was going to happen. Well, no, he said, no, Yox, you're the cornerstone here. You're staying. And he retained me. And Gene came in right when all this recruiting was just took off, where it was a 24/7 deal. And he did a great job navigating, how recruiting was taking off. And he made sure that the strength and conditioning area was a part of that as well. Yeah. And made it very, very important as on recruiting weekends. Not that the other guys didn't either, but it was a huge part of it. And Gene was a good delegator as well, and could relate to the kids, and he's still doing it. He's the DC at North Carolina, and I expect Jim being a head coach, or Jim. I expect Gene to be a head coach again at some point. Then my last boss in college was David Bailiff down at Rice, and David had played for Coach Wacker in college. And that's how I got to know David. Coach Wacker was the head football coach at Southwest Texas. Coach Bailiff played for him, and then I was at East Texas, and we were in the same conference. Yeah. So David and I had known each other a long time, and David was a lot like coaching with Coach Wacker. Same mannerisms, and coaching at Rice, that was a different place now. That was, it's a different kid and things like that. And David navigated that really, really well. And so, every coach I worked for, and even the other sport coaches that I had at TCU and UCLA, and the ones that I had a bit of contact with at Auburn, they were, for the most part, you had some egos and things like that, but for the most part, man, they were incredible. I was very, very fortunate.
Yeah.
Really lucky.
Now, changing gears here because we're getting toward the end. You've also spent some time coaching in high school,
Mm-hmm.
um,
Loved it.
and you're around a lot of high school programs now
Right.
um, in your business. So uh, how did college coaching and then coaching high school kids differ? And what are some things that you think are important that high school coaches, high school athletes, and parents of high school athletes need to understand about strength and conditioning and the importance of it, not just for performance, but for just overall mental and physical development.
Right. Well, unlike yourself, where you start out in high school and then went to college, I did the opposite way. And so when I left Auburn, my first job out of Auburn before Rice was at Houston Straight Jesuit. And I went to a Catholic high school, as a youth. So I kind of knew what I was getting into, and really enjoyed that. But went to Strake, and then I've been at East Central in San Antonio and Midway here in Waco. And the way that I came up, that I described earlier at TCU, I couldn't have not have gotten a better education to what I faced once I went to high school.
Right.
Because now you're a one-man band once again.
Yeah.
In many ways, except for being here at Midway, my facilities were very limited. And so you had to navigate that. Well, I was fortunate, and that's what I had to reach back to many, many years.
Yeah.
But I was more prepared, I think, than most guys leaving college and going to high school. I think I was much more prepared, and realized that you don't have to be real fancy. As a matter of fact, I tell people that programming in high school for me, with very, very few exceptions, everybody pulled, everybody squatted, everybody pressed, everybody did a perfect push up, everybody did a perfect chin up. And that was mainly what we did, and bent over rows and RDLs. That was the main of all my programs in high school. That was the main thing. Whereas in college, you have some athletes, like I described earlier, they need to be tweaked, and different buttons physically need to be pushed to get development. High school, and I talked about this at a recent speaking engagement. I'm going to do it again here in a couple of weeks. I think in high school, they get way too over the top with trying to do too many things.
Yeah, coaching like pros. Yeah.
Rather than being good at, and I think there's an appropriate time for that.
Yeah.
But when if you got a eighth, ninth, or 10th grader, maybe you got some outliers by the time they get to 12th grade. There's not a whole lot that you need to do with them. There needs to be intensity in the work. There needs to be purpose for the work that they're doing, but it doesn't have to be, real complicated. And I see that, again, you talked about what I do now. I go to a lot of places, and if coaches know my background, they think I'm going to be real impressed. They're doing all these things, and they're just more or less kind of wearing the kids out more than anything.
Yeah.
Whereas, it doesn't have to be that way. You still can get that fatigue and all that, but I'd rather see, and I did this in high school, I'd rather be really good at about 6 or 7 things in the weight room. I'd rather be really good at running technique and things of that nature than just running to be running, or lifting to be lifting. And that's what I've always, in high school, my transition to high school, it was more about now just being the only guy, rather than being at Auburn and having 4 full-time assistants that, we could handle that number of kids in the weight room. You had to in high school, you got to get used to having that big number, relying on other coaches to help you out. And a lot of times that's a feast or famine situation. The high schools where I was at, I received a lot of support from the coaches, but I've talked to other strength coaches where they put the coaches in the weight room to record and things like that, and it doesn't get done.
Yeah.
But I think you got in high school. I think there's no better plan than just to keep it very simple, because you're still gonna. I tell coaches this all the time. You can take a high school that might not be that athletically talented, and if there's a good, solid, comprehensive strength and conditioning plan there that it is stuck to, that can make all the difference in the world. Now, are you gonna beat some of these high schools that they've just got athletes walking all around? Maybe not, but you're going to win some of those games that you probably weren't going to win because of your athletic talent. And that was my transition piece was more now getting used to the numbers because I'm by myself, and that's when you got to have a loud ass whistle, you know.
Yeah.
And I did things. I mean, I did things in the high school level. We did cleans and squats. We did it on a whistle. We did it on a cadence because I had to watch. You know, here at Midway, I mean, you talk about walking into a heck of a deal. You know, I'm at Auburn. We have a full indoor that opens up into my weight room. I got 24 power racks. I get here to Midway, full indoor, 44 squat racks in the weight room.
Amazing.
Yeah. But they're all full, and I've got to be coaching kids. Yeah. You know, so I did everything on a cadence, and I remember one of the first conversations I had with Coach Hume, the football coach, when I got here, and he said, "Hey, the guy before you, we had a lot more weight on the bar," and I said, "Well, Coach, by doing these cadence squats, believe me, they're still getting the work done. We're gonna be okay, but I just got to make sure everybody's doing it correctly first."
Right.
And that's what I've always believed in.
Yeah.
So
a lot of people still do that.
Yeah.
Especially in high schools, because you got to make sure that, like you said, everybody is getting the work done.
Now, the other thing that I see too is kids are playing, you know, they're specializing too much.
Yeah.
And then they're playing all the time.
Yeah.
You know, we have a great volleyball program here at Midway High School. And I've had girls that have gone off to play in college, and I've seen them traveling around, you know, and I'll call them up to see if they want to go to dinner or something like that. And I've had more than one former volleyball athlete say that they're getting more rest now in college than they did in high school because they're playing all the time. And then what takes place, what suffers when they're playing is they're not training.
Right.
And kids are they're playing too much, or mommy and daddy think that I know we have a strength coach, but I'm going to hire this other guy to train you too.
To do extra.
Yeah. And it doesn't have to be that way.
Yeah. So here's, you know, I wanted to finish with this because I'm really interested in this part of it, and it's one of the reasons why I wanted you on here is I wanted you to talk about, because there is life after coaching, and there's life after sports, and I wanted to talk to you about how your strength and conditioning journey is tied to your current work at Dynamic Fitness and Strength.
I appreciate that. It's kind of funny. You know, I got hired by a former assistant, Craig Sowers, to be the Texas rep. They never had somebody directly working for them. And it's funny that you asked the question the way you did, how it's tied to it. A lot of people think, okay, well, you were a strength coach. Now you're selling weight equipment. This ought to be just easy peasy. This has been one of the most challenging transitions I've ever made. And my wife, she was here a little while ago. She went back to work, but she could tell you that there were times when I first started out that this laptop that I'm staring at, it almost got thrown through some windows and punched. And because yes, I'm talking to coaches all day. I'm giving them my expertise about equipment, things of that nature. But then there's all this other stuff, writing up quotes, remembering SKU numbers and stuff that I really had to transition into. And it's been a good transition. The thing that I tell coaches when I meet them and, you know, they have a need for equipment, I tell them they're going to get more of a strength coach than they are going to get a sales rep, you know. And we talked about my daughter's wedding. I got bills to pay, right?
Yeah.
But at the same time, I'd rather see people get really good equipment and quality service. And so that's what I push through from my experience as a strength coach. Just the work ethic and things like that. And don't get me wrong, I get competitive about losing a job too.
Yeah.
You know, there's a lot of great companies out there, and you and I have used them all. And when I looks like I'm going to get a big room and I get beat by one of those other companies, I'm not very happy about it. And I think that's part of just my competitive nature as a coach. You know, it's the same thing. But it's it's great going in to see coaches and talking to them about developing their room, and you got to, sometimes you have to be careful about giving too many ideas and stuff like that. You don't want to offend anybody, because there's times where I walk in and the strength coach in me is like, oh, no. The room cannot be, we got to set this room up a different way. But again, that's their room. And so you got to, you're on a little bit of a balance beam there, to, just doing that sort of thing. But it's been a challenge, but I'm enjoying it. And, and I think coaches are kind of surprised. I'd rather talk training most of the time than, the sale. To me, the sale, if they're truly interested, that's going to take care of itself. But I talked to a coach the other day that's out in East Texas, and I didn't get their room. Somebody else got their room, but I had him on my call list because we developed a relationship. And I just called him to just see how their off season was going and stuff like that. And he was really surprised to hear from me. But, the relationship part of it to me has been the biggest thing. And I've enjoyed it. Great company to work for. So,
and that's kind of the transition that I've made with the Moffitt method. And, I'd much rather be talking training and stuff. But like you said, following some of these software packages that you use when you're tracking sales and phone calls and emails, and that's all new to me. Talking training, that's easy.
Sure. Well,
just like you just said, that comes easy, but it's all stuff.
We both out kicked our coverage when it came to significant others. And I got to one point where I was really pissed off one night about I tell people this. We have a guy back in Wisconsin where we manufacture. And I was calling that guy every day going, hey, so-and-so, what's the SKU number for this? And I tell people that I know he had a voodoo doll of me on his desk. And it looked like Yoxall, and he was just poking that damn thing. Well, anyway, one day I just got really frustrated. I think I was working on a Saturday, and like we all do, I still, even though I'm not coaching, I still work on Saturday. Anyway, I was really frustrated, and I couldn't remember this SKU, and I'd called this guy already about 15 times that day, and I was just really pissed about it. And my wife came in and she goes, hey, what did Fred Washington at TCU squat in 1987? And I said, he squatted 736 pounds. And she goes, yeah. If all these people all these sales reps you're dealing with, they know their SKU numbers because that's all they've done. She said, you're going to end up getting it. You just need time. She goes, you're telling me what a guy squatted more than 30 years ago. And it's just, and then, that kind of hit home with me. And now I started looking at numbers and SKUs, and they started making more sense as to why it was that SKU. And I went, oh, this shit's tied together. Okay.
Yeah.
So, but again, it took my wife going, hey, dumbass.
Yeah, that's the way it is with me, man. I'm getting better. Now I've got, we have a COO who has to be the most patient human being in the world to put up with me and he's got a different piece of software. This guy used to work for Apple, and that's why he's working for us, because all of our stuff is online. It's all zeros and ones. So he knows this stuff left and right and inside and out, and he's got a different software package for everything, and I get it all confused. So he has to dumb all that stuff down for me so I can handle it. But we've got a great team here.
Yeah.
and they help me. And just like Nancy, Jill is really good with numbers and all that type of stuff.
Right.
And
Yeah.
I'm not. So I struggle a little bit myself. Well,
I've
Coach,
enjoyed it though. I'll
yeah.
always work. I'll always work.
Yeah, me too. Me too. Coach, I appreciate you coming on here, man. It's been a blast. It's exactly what I thought it was going to be. It's just two old farts talking training.
Yeah.
And you know, again, our friendship is, I don't even know, it was like 1999, I guess, when we played y'all. So, 24 years.
Oh no, man, that was 19. You talking about the Miami game?
Yeah.
Oh, Coach, that was season in 97, 98. Yeah, 98, 98. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh,
So
yeah.
that's been a long time ago. So we've remained good friends ever
Always
since.
will be, man.
Yeah, and we've talked about the kids getting married, and
Yep.
I don't have any grandkids yet, man.
We don't either. But I'm going to spoil the hell out of them. I know that.
Yeah, I know. I'm waiting, and I'll have a set of barbells for them too. So
Yes.
and I don't, so there's somebody downstairs working out in our garage now. So to have 3 generations, hopefully someday trained in that garage down there, just like your garage. My garage and your garage look just alike.
Well, and my daughter, I didn't mention this, but she kind of followed in my footsteps. She majored in kines at TCU, and she's a certified she asked me which certification for a personal trainer she should get. Mm-hmm. And I said, oh, you need to get that one through the NSCA. And she goes, Dad, I heard that was really hard. And I went, yeah, it is. And so she's got that, and she runs a faculty student fitness center at a medical school in Fort Worth now.
Awesome.
And so,
awesome.
Oh yeah. Yep. My wife Marley and I'd go off and go train him. Nancy just shake her head, just go, okay.
Yeah.
I bought her a pair of weightlifting shoes for Christmas one year.
Yeah. Oh, she was fired up.
Oh yeah, man.
That's awesome, man. That is awesome. That is awesome. Well, Coach, I sure do appreciate it.
So man, this made my damn year, man. This is awesome.
Yeah, I appreciate it. And,
okay, brother.
Take care, and we'll be talking soon, okay?
Okay, man. Love you.
I love you too. Bye-bye.
All right. Bye.
This brings us to the end of today's podcast. Thank you very much for tuning in. Please take a moment to subscribe to the Moffitt Method podcast and share it with your friends. For more information about the Moffitt Method speed, strength, and conditioning programs, visit our website at moffittmethod.fit. Thank you very much for tuning in. We'll see you again next week. Bye-bye.